Welcome to conference. This week we're in our lovely new Pacific Health and Wellness Center. I'm in the waiting room where people can wait for their wonderful sessions they'll be having here. This conference is one of my favorites. It's so beautiful. We're going from last week talking about the springtime and the beautiful Taoist passage that talks about the butterfly and the caterpillar transforming into the butterfly, and how even the caterpillar has a sense of that something is awakening within them. And just looking at all of our lives, the time of spring is a time when we, even here in California where the seasons are so subtle that we feel a shift in our bodies and the seasons, and we feel a shift as we wake up and the light has changed and there are beautiful, colorful flowers everywhere for the springtime and the buzzing of the bees, and something within us just begins to stir. It's springtime and we maybe change the way we eat or start to feel different in the way we're waking up or doing things. And so in keeping with that, I wanted to come back to this whole idea of why Ashtanga. And for the springtime, I actually didn't do it purposely, but it worked out purposely. I was having everyone change their chaturangas for 3 to 4 weeks. Instead of just jumping right into chaturanga, we went into plank and really worked on building different muscles, on strength, on not only coming down, but being able to push back up. And on Sunday, I asked all my students, like, how was that for you? Be honest. Did you love it? Did you hate it? And we got a mixed review of folks that said it was a game changer. It completely changed how they're working in chaturanga, felt stronger, felt more of a pause in their mind, more mindful, that space in between. And a few people said it totally annoyed them, that their chaturanga was just fine and they didn't know why I was mixing it up, or that it was kind of, it hurt them a little bit or it threw them off, and so they didn't like it. And I loved all the responses because it really was an example not only of how I want to help all of us continue to shift and change our physical body, but also our mental patterns and our mental body. And I think of all the people that love, to do things the same way and to have things a certain pattern or stay in that way of being, Ashtangis are like number one, because we've chosen a practice where we memorize it and we go down that path and we go down that path and we go down that path, which is beautiful. But the spring reminds us, and the teachings leading up to this remind us that we need to move the furniture and we all need to change and we all need shift. And it's hard when we're in these patterns. And so I really wanted all of us to think again about the neural pathways, is that it's like a path that you go down in your mind, like a path that you go down when you're going down a trail in the forest. And the more you go down that trail, the more you create a pathway that you go down naturally. And our mind is like that. So I think this thought, and I always think this thought, and then you do this, and I always do that. And we get in these patterns of not only thinking, we get in patterns of reacting, we get into patterns of being with other people, how we respond to situations. And sometimes that's beautiful, but oftentimes for us, just the way we're designed as human beings is we just need to shift and change and welcome change in our life. So this idea of, as Ashtangis, having you change up your chaturangas was one way for me to show us how we get so set in a pathway and how it's good for us to just move out of that and change something just a little bit to create something new in our life. And, that happens naturally in life. It happens naturally in Ashtanga whenever we get injured, or whenever we go to a workshop and a teacher says, I want you to do this differently, or a teacher introduces a new pose or a new way of doing something. And oftentimes an injury is never welcome, but I always say to my students, I'm like, you're injured, good, because that means you're going to change the way you look at your practice. You're going to change the way you do your practice. Something within you can't do this, and so you're going to do that. And maybe instead of focusing on jumping, you're going to focus on walking with stronger core, or lowering it down slower and more mindfully. So everyone who's ever had an injury, which is everyone, will say that there's a gift from that if we allow ourselves that. There's a gift when we go to a workshop and a teacher asks us to try something different. And those are beautiful metaphors in our yoga practice for life. So oftentimes in life it's the same. I wouldn't welcome change oftentimes when it comes as a trauma, or it comes as a challenge, or it comes as being literally rear-ended either in my car or emotionally, but it causes us to think or do something different. It causes us to shift our mind patterns. And last week I used this as an example, but I just want to use it again as an example that what I'm talking about is so crucial to me for our own happiness, and it has to do with how we live the moments of our life. And the one thing I hope that everyone who's listening to this particular teaching today gets out of this is what I'm asking for myself and for you to do is to change. And oftentimes when we look around our lives, we want other people to change. We want someone at work to change. We want our work situation to change. We want our partners to be different. We want them to be better. We want them to listen to us differently. We want them to respond to us differently. And our life is like that. But what I have found for myself and what I want to share with all of you is when I choose to change myself, to just change one pattern of thinking, one pattern of responding, and instead of going down the normal path, I move the furniture and I go this way. Or instead of going home the same way on autopilot, I decide to go home that way and see what happens when I just shift my regular patterns of being. And what we find is when we do this, everything shifts. So we understand we can't change other people. The only person we could ever change is ourselves. But how often do we really put that into play? And so my example last week was that I had a situation with someone I love very, very, very much, and they were upset about something, and I was trying to hold a space for them to be upset, and at the same time I was very defensive, and I felt like they were in the wrong, and it's just a normal pattern. All of you can relate to this. And I was able to do something different. I was able to do something different in that situation. I listened differently, and I tried to listen as if I were that person and hear them from a different perspective. Not from my perspective that was saying, you're wrong, you should be more compassionate, you should be, all these things. But instead, just really listening to how they felt and what was going on with them on a deeper level. And at the end of that conversation, I wound up saying something very different than I normally do, and being different than I normally am with this person in that situation. And what happened was beautiful. That person's response to me was no longer angry and defensive, but loving. And I love this example so much because it reminds me that happens a million times throughout the day when I am just in a pattern of being and don't realize that it's a simple turn to the right or adjustment to the left that changes my own thinking pattern that could possibly be a different way of responding or someone else responding to me differently. And it really also goes back to this idea that Nelson Mandela gave us in our quote for last week was, do I fall on the side of hope or fear? And the more and more I'm living these teachings and I'm really thinking about what my mind is doing, and sometimes it's more in worry and fear or what if this happened and it's not good, I come back to this place where I'm like, I can just change that so simply to something that's true and something that's real, but that's on the hopeful side, that's on the positive side, that falls on the love side. And if you just try this out with me for a little bit, you're going to find that it's a game changer. It changes everything. And it's very much an example of how we take our yoga practice off of the yoga mat and into our lives and say, I go down this pattern, I can do something different. So I have two words that I want to share with you that I think are the most powerful words that I want to just plant in your brain today and have you play around with. And these two words are two of my favorites when you put them together. What if? What if? So oftentimes the neocortex, our developed brain is like, oh, what if this happens? What if the person, the person I love right now is sick? What if this person gets sicker? And, what if we were right on the ocean? Someone was talking about a tsunami the other day. What if a tsunami wipes this building out? And, there's so many scary what ifs and things to worry about that oftentimes never happen. But we can get really down that pattern of creating this reality. But there's other what if that I absolutely love, and I want to ask and invite all of you to join with me is what if we land on the side of hope, and in that situation where normally this person's angry and we respond that way or whatever, we say, what if this could be a loving communication we have with each other? What if this situation at work could be different? What if I could enjoy this person more? And we just can keep creating these hopeful ideas of imagining things in our mind that are better, are wonderful, are beautiful. And so I finish you with a quote for this week, which is one of my favorites. We're going to have a workshop, Say Yes to the Adventure, stepping into your muchiness, your being much muchier from the Alice in Wonderland movie. And I took the quotes this week from Alice in Wonderland, the Lewis Carroll. And I love this. He says, "Why, sometimes I've believed as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast," which then the Mad Hatter says is a very good practice. And I want to invite all of you to do that, to just imagine the most wonderful things, to play with this idea of possibility, of hope. And the 2 words I want to just throw out there for all of you to just play around with is what if? Namaste.